If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome. I'm Alastair Stewart, and for the next 2 hours I'll be keeping you company on TV and radio with the stories that really matter across the country. Plenty coming up. Our big topic is the crisis in Ukraine. Will diplomacy or force resolve it? Amid warnings the UK will not be able to fly British nationals out of Ukraine if Russia invades, I'll be unpicking it all with a wealth of guests. Plus, cheese, rural roaming and political indoctrination in our schools. But first, let's bring you a full news update. Here's Ray Addison.
Thanks, Alistair. It's coming up to 1 minute past 12. The Defence Secretary says he fears a Russian attack on Ukraine is highly likely. Speaking to the Sunday Times, Ben Wallace said there's a whiff of Munich in the air, referring to diplomatic efforts which failed to prevent the Second World War. As such, he says he's cancelled a planned family trip abroad due to the worsening situation. Conservative MP and former United Nations commander in Bosnia, Bob Stewart, told GB News President Putin should think carefully about the consequences of invading.
He is really gambling if he goes into Ukraine. Warfare involves all aspects of society. And if the Russian people actually really suffer because Mr. Putin miscalculates and puts Russian troops into Ukraine, actually, he may well rue that day.
The Labour Party is urging the government to learn lessons from the Afghanistan evacuation to help people leave Ukraine if Russia invades. Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy is calling for phone lines to be staffed 24/7 and extra resources put in place to process visas. He's also written to the Foreign Secretary saying the Labour Party stands united with the government over Russian aggression. Britons have been told by the Foreign Office to leave Ukraine immediately as Russia could launch an attack in the coming days. The Prime Minister will leave London this week, insisting he's getting on with the job despite a police investigation into alleged lockdown breaches. Number 10 says he'll start the week in Scotland at a manufacturing site before heading to an oncology centre in northwest England. Boris Johnson says the government is focused on working to unite and level up the country. Lord Frost is among a group of senior Tory MPs and peers urging Boris Johnson to reverse the government's ban on fracking as the UK faces an energy crisis. In a joint letter to the Prime Minister, the former Cabinet Minister and around 29 other Conservatives said it's time to reverse this moratorium. The shale gas mining ban came into effect in 2019 after attempts caused 2 minor earthquakes in Lancashire. Lord Frost says ending it would lead to a British energy renaissance. The Mayor of London says he'll oppose the appointment of a new Metropolitan Police Chief unless they have a robust plan to deal with cultural problems in the force. Writing in The Observer, Sadiq Khan said he was deeply concerned that public trust in the Met had been shattered by a series of scandals. Mr Khan said he'll work closely with Priti Patel on the selection of Dame Cressida's successor. 7 people have been rescued after a mezzanine floor collapsed last night at a pub in East London. Ambulance crews declared a major incident at the 2 More Years bar in Hackney Wick. Medics treated 13 people, 3 with potentially serious injuries. A man who was at the venue at the time described hearing a cracking noise before the floor collapsed. The International Atomic Energy Agency is reviewing plans to release 1 million tonnes of water from Japan's Fukushima nuclear power plant. The water had been used to cool the plant's reactors, damaged in the 2011 tsunami. Japan now plans to discharge the treated water into the sea in 2023. Neighbouring China and South Korea have objected to the move. 200 protesters continue to block North America's busiest land border crossing, the Ambassador Bridge in Canada, that despite police efforts to move them on. Demonstrators opposing vaccine mandates have occupied the bridge for 5 days, slowing trade and prompting President Biden to call for an end to the siege. So far, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has rejected calls to use the military. And fully vaccinated British travellers heading to France no longer have to take a coronavirus test before departure. The travel rules have been eased just in time for the half-term holidays, with many holidaymakers expected to head to French ski resorts. The move comes after the UK significantly eased its own rules for arriving travellers. OK, this is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now it's back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
Ray, thanks very much indeed for all of that. Coming up this afternoon on Alastair Stewart and Friends, the Ukraine crisis, what the chances are of the tensions between Russia and the West descending into war, and the UK's role in it. Armed Forces Minister James Heappey has said that the RAF would not be in a position to go in to rescue people if a war did break out, and people there should leave now. Plus, the Education Secretary, Nadhim Zahawi, says schools must root out activist teaching after some teachers have been accused of brainwashing children. Mr. Zahawi has vowed to make it clear to teachers their job is about education, not indoctrination. And what makes a man from a pretty wealthy background decide to pursue a career in cheese? Well, we'll get the answer from Richard Hollingbury, a friend of mine and the founder of Godminster Cheese in Somerset. But first, Ukraine. The situation there is one of those crises when people like me fully expect the phone to ring over dinner or even in the middle of the night to say, "It started." The signals are mixed and dramatic. The United States have warned that they think Russia would invade, perhaps within days. The UK Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, is talking about the whiff of Munich being in the air, a deal to avoid conflict, but one which caves in to Putin's demands. The key players are still talking. But yesterday's diplomacy ended with a fruitless phone call between Presidents Biden and Putin. It's all very curious because the German Chancellor still plans talks with Putin next week. The Winter Olympics are a factor too. They don't end until February the 20th, and it's thought that Russia would not want to risk annoying China's President Xi by going in before then. Now, all of that said, most countries, us included, told their citizens to get out of Ukraine. What's clear is the means are there for action. The hardware on the Russian side appears to have peaked, with the real show of force, military exercises, now underway. NATO, not least the United States and the United Kingdom, is still topping up its forces in neighbouring NATO countries. Now, much of the media loves a good war, great pictures and tales of dare-doing. But having spent 3 months covering the first Gulf War in the 1990s, I am not one of them. People get hurt, many die, men and women in uniform and adults and children in civilian clothes. But what I do love is a calm assessment from the grown-ups of just what might happen, what's at stake, and how worried you and I really should or should not be. So today, that's what we're doing. We're going to look at that and what the chances are of jaw-jaw diplomacy descending into war fighting, and what the UK's role might be in all of that. I have a former UK ambassador to the United Nations, a former head of the Royal Air Force, and a brace of senior MPs, Labour and Tory, from the Foreign Affairs Select Committee to help me and you get a grip on it all. Also, do let me know what you think, what's going on, what my guests say, what your hopes and fears are. Have you a family member in the Army, Navy or Royal Air Force already deployed or poised to be dispatched? I'd really love to hear from you. GBViews at gbnews.uk, Twitter, Facebook or any of our social media sites. And I'll give you some thoughts of mine at the very end. So, kicking off our conversation, I'm delighted to be joined by one of our top jaw men. Sir Mark Lyall-Grant is the former UK ambassador to the United Nations and National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister. Mark, thank you so much for joining us. A friend of mine said last night, quotes, Putin's either playing a blinder or he's on a suicide mission. What do you think?
Well, Putin has actually achieved quite a lot by what he's done over the last few months. Because if you recall, about 6 months ago, all the focus of the United States administration and much of the world was on China. And what Putin has managed to do is to put himself center stage again, to say, look, I will not be ignored. Russia will not be ignored. We are still a major player. So he has managed to put himself center stage. He's actually put his demands, unacceptable as many of them are to NATO, out there on the table, and people are discussing them. And he's finding that, President Biden is having meetings with him. President Macron has been to Moscow. Chancellor Scholz, as you mentioned, is going to be going to Moscow next week. Boris Johnson's calling him. Suddenly he is the center of attention. So even if he doesn't take any further military action, I think he will have achieved quite a bit. And we shouldn't forget that as we're talking about Putin not going further, it sort of cements what he has already done in terms of the annexation of Crimea and the virtual occupation of the Donbass. Yeah. So to some extent, I would say President Putin has played this quite well.
Yeah, but he's also a bully with little regard for borders or international law. Is NATO pussyfooting?
No, I think the Western response has been pretty good. It's based on a three-strand strategy, supporting Ukraine, and we've seen a lot of economic and political support, but also some direct military support from the Americans and from the British, for instance. It's about deterrence, sort of warning Putin that there will be very severe consequences in the terms of sanctions for him and some of his entourage if he goes ahead with a further military adventure. But it's also about saying, look, we are prepared to discuss some of your so-called security concerns. And I think that three-part strategy so far is the correct one. Whether it will work, because Putin is very emotional about Ukraine, we will know, I think, in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah,
and one of the reasons that people are getting very excited is that they think the next 2 weeks are going to be the critical period.
Well, absolutely. And Liz Truss is still talking about planning tours of Eastern Europe over that period of time as well. But the Defence Secretary, who's just back from Moscow, says he sniffs Munich in the air, a deal that you will know the detail of much better than I, but where Chamberlain fell hook, line and sinker for Hitler saying, oh, no, I'll be a good boy. And we all know what ended in the Second World War. Are we being conned by this clever man?
I don't think so. I think there is a risk for Ukraine that the great powers, as it were, speak about Ukraine over their heads and they're not involved. Because the focus of much of the diplomacy at the moment, particularly from the French and the Germans, is about the so-called Minsk Agreements of 2014. Now, those Minsk Agreements are not perfect documents by any means. They are ambiguous. They're interpreted differently by the Russians and by the Ukrainians. They were imposed largely on Ukraine. Ukraine did agree to them, but at a time when troops were dying and the separatists were advancing with Russian support. And I think probably that's what Ben Wallace is referring to, that if concessions are made under the Minsk Agreements to Russia in exchange for them not invading Ukraine, then there is a danger that Putin will see that as weakness and think he can go even further in the future.
You are very experienced in this arena and have worked alongside great leaders, both here in the United Kingdom and abroad when you were at the UN. I want to pick you up on that point finally, because I sense that Putin sees in Biden a weak leader who screwed up over Afghanistan, whose domestic popularity is crashing. Boris Johnson, with all of his troubles, perhaps minor, but compared to this, but the guy's in trouble. An electioneering Macron, and Scholz in Germany, a new boy. Putin is a master of timing. He sees a gap there.
Well, I think to some extent that is right. Putin has been in power for 22 years. He's seen presidents come and go. He's seen prime ministers come and go. And that is some of the advantages, the natural advantages of autocracy, if you like, of dictatorship of the sort that Putin is in charge of in Russia. You know, what I found during my diplomatic career is that it's extremely difficult to play poker against someone who is prepared to go all in on every hand. And that is what we're facing, that President Putin is prepared to risk everything for fairly minor gains. And the West, on the whole, is not, because it is more conditioned under a democracy by public opinion. And that's why dealing with Putin is extremely difficult. He only understands strength, and it's important that that strength is demonstrated. But it is still extremely difficult to negotiate with a man who operates in that way.
I listened to an intriguing interview with the former Supreme Allied Commander Europe, General Philip Breedlove, who I'm absolutely convinced that you know and probably know quite well. He said of Russian expansion, NATO, quotes, failed in South Georgia, failed in the Crimea and failed in Donetsk. Will we also fail in Ukraine, close quotes?
Yeah, I think that's a little bit unfair. I mean, none of those countries are actually members of NATO. What would be a total failure of NATO is if Russia took some action against the Baltic states and there was no reaction, because there is that treaty commitment to defend all NATO members. Ukraine, unfortunately for Ukraine, is not actually a NATO member and therefore doesn't have that guarantee of defence. Having said that, Britain is one of the original signatories of the Budapest Memorandum in 1994, which did pledge to protect the sovereignty of Ukraine. And therefore we, as Britain, do have something of a stronger moral responsibility for Ukraine than some of the other European countries do.
Finally, diplomats don't bet. They're far too cautious for such nonsenses as that. But indulge me just for a moment, Mark. What are the odds on conflict and the odds on diplomacy resolving this matter?
Well, I'll be very cowardly and sit on the fence a bit and say I think it's a 50-50 at the moment. I certainly do not think that conflict is inevitable, and I think those who are suggesting that is unwise, and it doesn't reflect the reality. I think there is still scope for diplomacy, but I do think that the next 2 weeks will be critical.
Sir Mark Lisle-Grant, always a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you so much for your time this Sunday afternoon. That's Mark Lisle-Grant, the former UK ambassador to the United Nations and National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister. Joining me now on the phone is Sir Michael Graydon, former Chief of the Air Staff, i.e. the guy who ran the Royal Air Force. Have we got Michael?
Yes. Good.
I'm so sorry. Because it's telephony, I couldn't see that. Let me just remind people at home, because I know a little bit about you. I've worked side by side with you before. You were Air Officer Commanding Strike Command during the Gulf War, which I covered, and Chief of the Air Staff when the RAF enforced no-fly zones over Iraq and Bosnia. I say that because it means that you do actually have experience of when these ghastly things can go wrong. Given that, what do you think is the likely resolution of the Ukraine crisis, Michael?
Just briefly correct you, I took over strike command from Air Chief Marshal Hine at the end of the Gulf War, but I was supporting him when I was commanding Support Command. But yes, the rest of it's correct. Sorry, the question?
The question is, what's your bet on how this matter is going to resolve itself? Will it be militarily or will it be diplomatically?
well, I hope diplomatically, and I share your view that war is the last resort. It's a horrid thing, and we must do everything possible to avoid it. Where are we? For the last 2 or 3 weeks, I've been on the side of those who say that Putin will probably find a way out of this, having, as Sir Mark so rightly said, got the attention that he wants. The man himself is vain. We know about that because he rides horses, shows his chest, shows himself in judo and ice hockey and all the rest of it. A vain man, but one who wants a legacy in his country. He wants to go down as a Soviet hero, the man who restored, to the extent possible, the Soviet as a great power. And he looks, as you know, on the breakup of the Soviet Union as a catastrophe. So I think one needs to have that in the back of one's mind when one is looking at whether or not he will go the whole hog. I've reached a rather worrying conclusion that he might well risk that whole hog, that invasion of Ukraine. I just see the signs now. When I look, and I'm looking at a map now where his forces are deployed all the way around north, east, and south, and only the NATO countries to the west does he not have the forces. He is perfectly positioned for an invasion, and he's moved his troops into positions close to major towns where he obviously will want to take. All of these things are leading me to the view, and again, Sir Marcus touched on this, that he's got the opportunity of a lifetime now to do something that the Russian people actually would quite like him to do. I don't think they get the full story in Moscow of what's at hand and the consequences of it, but the thought that they could get Ukraine back for what you might say would be relatively low risk is something I think, quite strongly held in Moscow.
To what extent do you agree that Putin, in assessing that risk, sees a weak Biden who bails out of Afghanistan, Johnson in trouble at home on the domestic front, an electioneering Macron, and a new boy in office in Germany? He can read those things. He's been around a long time. Now's his moment.
I agree. I mean, he looks at the cracks, and however you try to duff it up, the cracks in Europe on unity, the cracks in NATO on what should be spent on defence and taking positive action are there for anybody to see. And as I said before, he sees this opportunity, and he's, as you rightly say, he's looking at America, which has got more than half an eye on China, and the polarised politics and a weak president. All of that is opportunity writ large, I think. Add in China, because when I was briefed some years ago by the then Commander-in-Chief of the southern region of NATO, he showed a map of what the view from Moscow was of the surrounding threat. And it was actually very illuminating when you looked at things from Moscow. Everywhere you looked was a threat. And you could understand why they wanted the buffer states that they had in the Soviet Union, as it were, acting as a barrier to that. A major factor was China. Now, China is now in bed with Russia. So he's got that side of it sorted out. And what he's also got is a backing, I think, by China, who views this whole thing with great enjoyment, and perhaps a test case for Taiwan.
I couldn't agree with you more, and absolutely terrifying. We've got about a minute left, Michael, so I want to take you back to Sky Blue uniform days. We've committed more fighter jets and fighter bombers to Cyprus. We have intelligence-gathering aircraft from the UK helping in the effort to patrol that border. This is a serious Royal Air Force commitment.
Yes, it is. It's part of our standing up, if you like, for NATO. Whether we would actually involve, I mean, I cannot see Putin using his aircraft to attack where we are attacking Cyprus, for example, or attacking where they are in Romania or Poland or wherever. I don't see that being on the card. So I'm not quite sure what they're doing, other than saying we're here, we're unified, we don't like what we are doing, beware. So there's not much else you can do.
Final question is, again, you commanded these people directly. What will be going through the minds of squadron commanders in Cyprus, plotters and planners at the Ministry of Defence, and most importantly, pilots and navigators in those aircraft who know that's why they're there?
Well, the usual things, but I think it's worth reminding our viewers and listeners that the RAF has been doing this sort of thing actually since the end of the Gulf War I. It's been operating in the Middle East and is still operating in the Middle East non-stop, day on day. So actually, I don't think there'll be much change in the mentality. They're seeing it once again from just a different perspective.
Let's hope that they stay put where they are, but I fear I share your degree of pessimism. Michael Graydon, always a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you so much for your time this Sunday afternoon. Thank you. That's Air Chief Marshal Sir Michael Graydon, the former Air Officer Commanding Strike Command and the boss of the Royal Air Force overall. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. We've lots more still to come today. Education Secretary Nadeem Zahawi's warned that schools must stop teaching activist propaganda after some teachers were accused of brainwashing children. All of that to come, but first let's bring you up to date with the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking unsettled still as heavy rain and strong winds continue to push eastwards. Let's take a look at the details. After a very wet and windy morning in the southwest, conditions will be starting to quieten down. However, it won't dry up entirely and there will be further rain to come. Meanwhile, in the southeast, the heaviest and most persistent rain of the day will arrive during the middle of the afternoon with strong winds as well. Over in Wales, the most unsettled weather will be clearing away towards the east. That being said, some heavy rain is still likely, particularly over the mountains. It's a similar picture in the northwest of England, where the heaviest and most persistent rain should now be clearing. It'll stay cloudy though, with some outbreaks of rain. In the northeast, the heavy rain will push through over the next few hours, so by 3 p.m. things will have started to settle down. The strong winds are set to be easing too. There'll be something of a north-south split in the weather across Scotland. Wet in the south with some hill snow, drier and sunnier further north though, a few showers. Whilst it won't be as wet or windy as it was this morning in Northern Ireland, there is still going to be some lingering rain around with heavy bursts possible. The unsettled weather will continue to push eastwards through this evening, although drier conditions will follow from the west, and that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
GBNews is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It's 12:30 and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News, TV and radio. The Education Secretary, Nadhim Zahawi, has today said that schools must stop teaching children activist propaganda. It comes after some teachers were accused of brainwashing their pupils. In one recent case, school children as young as 10 were urged by the teacher to write critical letters about the Prime Minister. So, does more need to be done to stop this type of teaching going ahead? Zahawi vows to make it clear to teachers that their job is about education, not indoctrination. Joining me now to discuss this is a good friend of the programme, the Editor-in-Chief of the Good Schools Guide, Lord Rafe Lucas, who I should say sits in the House of Lords and takes the Tory whip. Rafe, great to see you. One step back, what's the real evidence that this is a big problem and not just an isolated episode that was covered in the newspapers last week?
This is a problem. I'm not aware of it at all locally. I've been a great encourager of politics in local schools, mostly engaging with local issues which are essentially apolitical but still politics. But I took 5,000 paper birds from Eastbourne school children up to COP26 to express their views on the climate. So engagement with politics, really important in schools. And I'm not seeing biased teaching down by us, but you mustn't let this grow. It's a cancer. If you let it happen, then it will spread, as similar things have spread when it comes to teaching about gender issues, for instance.
Yeah, fascinating answer, because that, when I read it in the papers this morning, I thought, you sure about that? And as you know, I have family connections with teaching and with education as well. But what it did strike me was that if you want to say to children, whether they're even 10 years old, what do you think may be right or wrong about Boris Johnson, then it is absolutely vital that you also say what's right and wrong about Ed Davey, what's right and wrong about Keir Starmer. I think there should be more about politics in schools, but there should be none, zero, absolute, none whatsoever partisanship. Would you go along with that?
Absolutely, complete tolerance of different viewpoints.
Right. Did you then get your children also to write about what was wrong with carbon zero, carbon neutral economy, the cost of going green and the rest of it?
They were free to write whatever they wanted on the birds, and some of them put in advertisements for their YouTube channels, and some of them said, what are we doing using paper on making birds to go to Glasgow? So there was a whole range of views. No, I think children by and large are reacting sympathetically to their concern about the climate, which is a bit of a one-sided issue, but it's nonetheless, when it comes to serious politics, we're a swing seat. It's absolutely important that people can have all sorts of views and express them, and still be friends.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, serious, civilised, grown-up, balanced debate. Let me switch the subject. We've got a couple of minutes left, Rafe. A story that also really worried me in the papers this morning, and that is that the tutoring programme, part of the big catch-up plan, is simply not delivering. There are problems with one of the key suppliers, and there's another piece about one of the suppliers who was dropped because they were just a wee bit too expensive. This is a much more serious issue, isn't it? Catch up post-COVID, getting our kids back on track.
Getting it right is really important. They've tried a number of suppliers. It doesn't surprise me that one or two are failing. It's that they should keep on top of this, that they should really not accept failure, because tutoring is something that it is eminently possible to get right. If a particular supplier isn't coming up to scratch, turn to others. There are lots of good tutors in the country, lots of good organisations running tutors. Let's make this learn from the inevitable mistakes and do better.
Yeah. So to conclude, a friendly word of advice from you to Nadhim: concentrate more on the catch-up programme and don't worry too much about indoctrination.
Don't tolerate people who can't do it. The catch-up is really important. He's reacted to a story. I think he's reacted really well to it. It has ramifications, and politics and education, it's terribly important that politicians engage in what's being taught in schools. It's the way in which we can have our share of that conversation. What history should be taught? Is the maths that my child is being taught of any relevance to their future life? We need politicians to engage on that sort of thing. So I'm delighted to see Nadim doing it.
Rafe, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. That's Lord Rafe Lucas, the editor-in-chief of the Good Schools Guide, with some sage guidance there to the Department for Education as well. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends, and we've plenty more still to come this afternoon, including we'll be getting the latest from the countryside with our rural spotlight. But first, let's get the very latest on the news with Ray Addison.
Thanks, Alistair. It's 12:34. The Defence Secretary says he fears a Russian attack on Ukraine is highly likely. Speaking to the Sunday Times, Ben Wallace said there's a whiff of Munich in the air, referring to diplomatic efforts which failed to prevent the Second World War. The Labour Party is urging the government to learn lessons from the Afghanistan evacuation to help people leave Ukraine if Russia invades. Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy is calling for phone lines to be staffed 24/7 and extra resources put in place to process visas. He's also written to the Foreign Secretary saying the Labour Party stands united with the government over Russian aggression. The Prime Minister will leave London this week, insisting he's getting on with the job despite a police investigation into alleged lockdown breaches. Number 10 says he'll start the week in Scotland at a manufacturing site before heading to an oncology centre in northwest England. Lord Frost is among a group of senior Tory MPs and peers urging Boris Johnson to reverse the government's ban on fracking as the UK faces an energy crisis. In a joint letter to the Prime Minister, the former Cabinet Minister and around 29 other Conservatives said it would lead to a British energy renaissance. The shale gas mining ban came into effect in 2019 after attempts caused 2 minor earthquakes in Lancashire. The Mayor of London says he'll oppose the appointment of a new Metropolitan Police Chief unless they have a robust plan to deal with cultural problems in the force. Writing in The Observer, Sadiq Khan said he was deeply concerned that public trust in the country's biggest police force had been shattered by a series of scandals. On TV, online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Alastair Stewart and Friends will be back in a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 22 minutes to 1. You're watching Alastair Stewart and Friends on GB News, TV and radio. And goodness me, we've only been on air for 38 minutes and you've already been getting in touch on our big topic of the day, the crisis in Ukraine and what's really going on. We've had great contributions already from a former diplomat and a former boss of the Royal Air Force. I'm going to start with one that's literally just dropped on my phone. It's from JT in Leeds. Re-Ukraine, I really do think that Putin wants to be known as the Russian president who brought Ukraine back into the fold. But if he's allowed to, how long before the other former Soviet states, ? NATO will do nothing. That was part of the theme that we had here. Jeff comes into the argument, makes it a little bit more domestic. Starmer will be doing his best to undermine Boris, just as Labour did with the EU over Brexit. To be fair, Sir Keir Starmer has said he stands four square behind the Prime Minister on Ukraine, but Jeff's entitled to his view, as indeed are all of you, including Ed, who says, is Keir stealing Boris's thunder? It's not a competition. It's important everyone stands together on this issue. I merely repeat that I think on examination you'll find that, as things stand at the moment, that's exactly what Sir Keir is saying. Steve broadens it out. Russia doesn't like NATO on its doorstep, probably a bit like Russia moving into Scotland. We should keep well out of this. Biden is just making matters worse. So keep those emails and tweets coming in. All of our social media websites and sites are available to you. Now, we'll read more of those as they come along. But now let's move on to those who live in towns and cities. As I always say, it can be easy to lose touch with what's going on in the countryside and the world of farming and agriculture. So each week we check in with those at the forefront of our rural communities. And this week it's more important than ever, because with more people enjoying the outdoors, Natural England, in partnership with Natural Resources Wales, last week set out new guidance for land managers to help them ensure that visitors to the countryside can enjoy it in a responsible way. Published under the Countryside Code, the update provides recommendations to land managers on making rights-of-way accessible, creating safer environments, and installing clear signage to help the public respect, protect, and enjoy the countryside. Now, unsurprisingly, many living and working in the countryside felt that it was all a bit one-sided, offering little protection to those who live and work on the land. So we thought it was worth a discussion. And joining me first of all is Martin Underhill Mbe, Martin's former Dorset Police and Crime Commissioner. What's wrong with these guidelines, Martin?
Morning, Alistair. Nice to see you again. As you just said, it's very one-sided, and it's a bit of a dichotomy, a sort of catch-22, where Natural England, English Heritage and National Trust are seeing a 400% increase in walkers and cyclists and tourists coming onto their land, which is great because it helps them come out of COVID. But the fact is, this 400% increase, these townies, as we call them, they're not educated in countryside protocols, countryside safety or farm safety. And actually, we have to do it both ways. It has to be a two-way street. Yeah. And my view is that we should be adopting a comment someone made last week, which was, it's up to the newcomer to engage with those who came before them, not the other way around.
You mentioned coming out of COVID as well, and I'm all too familiar with the cost burden, like many other industrialists, that farmers have had to carry. And this guide is also all about farmers and landowners having to put up new signage, about investing in gates that automatically shut themselves. That last one is perhaps a good idea, but someone's got to pay for it. There's very little in the guidance that tells other people how they should behave when they do come to visit the countryside.
And that's exactly the point, isn't it? This tsunami of tourists, as I call it. I live rurally, I'm surrounded by farms. I've seen the 400% increase. And, let's take Chris and Dave, for example, who are hiking across a field where cows are calving or lambs are giving birth to giving birth to their babies. There's no training at all. And if we look at all the injuries being caused by dogs, people are not educated on taking their dogs across the countryside. And to me, this is just another hit that keeps coming for farmers. They've had to deal with Brexit, they've had to deal with diesel theft, poaching and intimidation from poachers, hare coursing, theft of plant and machinery, now the dog walkers, and a huge influx of people who don't understand the countryside. And there's nothing in this guidance which actually says, let's tell people what they should be doing. And as you say, who's paying for all this? Farmers are absolutely on the breadline trying to get over COVID and get over Brexit. And suddenly we've got to put up loads of signs and be really friendly to people who don't understand the countryside. And arguably, all that's going to happen is people will get injured. And we had the tragic case of David Clark in September 2020, killed, trampled by cows, several people seriously injured by cows. That is a lack of knowledge. That is an ignorance by people walking in fields, not understanding the dangers they're facing. And there's nothing in this guidance that turns it the other way around.
Yeah.
And I think we've got to have a code for people coming into our countryside.
Well, I hope that's heard in the corridors of power. The other thing that really upset me, as someone who I have a small farm and I do live in the countryside and I absolutely adore it, is that it says farmers and land managers are advised to contact the police to report any incidents of antisocial or threatening behaviour or even criminal damage. In my experience, rural police forces are simply not up to that. They don't have the numbers, they don't have the resources. You're a former police and crime commissioner. Would you agree with that?
I would absolutely agree with that, Alistair. I mean, in 2016, I funded a new rural crime team in Dorset, which has now doubled in size since I left, which is good. But actually, that was set up because of the voice of the farmers who were saying, you're not doing anything for us. And actually, the intimidation they're facing, not just from dog walkers, but from poachers driving on their land, is significant. And you're right, policing's never recovered from the 10 years of cuts. Most rural police forces really struggle to respond to a farmer saying, I need help. And of course, there was that famous case last week where the farmer was acquitted for turning over a vehicle, and he estimated it would take the police an hour to get to him and he was being actually physically assaulted. So there's lots of bits to this jigsaw. And I was quite angry to read that guidance because I think it's very one-sided and very naive.
Martin Underhill, always good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. That's Martin Underhill, the former Dorset Police and Crime Commissioner, with his thoughts. Joining me now to give his thoughts is a good friend of the programme. That's Mark Tufnell. He's the president of the Country Land and Business Association. Good to see you. Just talking there about the jigsaw needs to be reset and redone. Were you consulted on the content of this document? Hang on a minute. Are you muted? Can you check you're not on mute?
Right.
There we go. Sorry, we had a sound problem. Let me put the question to you again. Were you consulted on the content of this document?
Can you hear me now okay?
I can hear you loud and clear. And my question is whether or not the association was consulted on this document.
Yes, we were consulted, and we have been involved in discussions with Natural England and Natural Resources Wales, and we form an important access stakeholder group. And if you go back, Alistair, to the revision there was in summer 2020, which was 70 years after the first Countryside Code, that was significantly revised. And then this is a further revision with a further set of advice that's come out to landowners and farmers. I think I hear Martin's criticism, and part of it is, totally understandable. But it's about getting a message out, and we've responded by putting out messages with linking the environment and farming and coming up with a teacher resource pack to send out to schools. We have members of ours who put up QR codes on posts, giving information on how members of the public can better access the 144,000 miles of public footpaths there are. And I think it's about better educating the public as well as helping the farmers and the land managers. Yeah.
So that's an intriguing answer, because, and not what I'd expected, because what Martin and I were saying is it places all of the burden on farmers and landowners with safer gates, better gates, more signage, is exactly as you just described. Where's the cri de coeur to people who are coming crashing out of the cities into the countryside, leaving those gates open, letting their dogs run free and what have you? It's very one-sided.
Well, the public have a right to use the public right of way.
Yeah, but with responsibility.
But Alistair, it's for all of us and this programme and Natural England and the CLA and the NFU to get the message out. And we're trying to work out a positive way of getting a message out. We thought we could do it through schools, we could do it through better education for people who come to visit. Better signage is a good one. But there is one aspect which I think really should be taken very seriously by government. We put to government that the Highway Act should be amended to allow for temporary diversion of footpaths, which would take walkers away from cows and calves on a temporary basis to avoid people having to walk across those fields while the cows and calves were there. Now, unfortunately, that hasn't yet been addressed, and we're going to keep pressing on it. It would only be a temporary diversion, and we think it would help enormously. It's about better signs and better explanation to the general public as to how they can come and enjoy the countryside. And for so many of my members...
I understand that. My final point to you is this, though, as well, and particularly from the farming community as opposed to simply the landowning community. Get this wrong, and you run the risk of people drifting off pathways into crop fields, frightening livestock, seeing cows miscarry calves, ditto sheep and lamb. It's not just, let the townies enjoy the countryside. It's about our food supplies.
I entirely agree, and we've always said that people have to understand they're coming into our working environment. And so it's a case of making sure where you have those access points, put up proper signs saying, please keep your dog on a lead. Follow the signs that are there. If it's a yellow arrow, it's a footpath, and it's only for people on their feet. And it's incredibly important people keep their dogs under control. They don't let them run around. It's the dogs that cause the problems.
Absolutely, I agree with that, and owners of dogs. Mark Tufnell, President of the Country Landowner and Business Association. Great to see you, as always. Thank you very much indeed. Have a great afternoon. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. We've lots more coming up on the programme this afternoon, including an insight into a great British business and, more especially, cheese. What more do you need on a Sunday? Perhaps a weather forecast. Here it is.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking unsettled still as heavy rain and strong winds continue to push eastwards. Let's take a look at the details. After a very wet and windy morning in the southwest, conditions will be starting to quieten down. However, it won't dry up entirely and there will be further rain to come. Meanwhile, in the southeast, the heaviest and most persistent rain of the day will arrive during the middle of the afternoon with strong winds as well. Over in Wales, the most unsettled weather will be clearing away towards the east. That being said, some heavy rain is still likely, particularly over the mountains. It's a similar picture in the northwest of England, where the heaviest and most persistent rain should now be clearing. It'll stay cloudy, though, with some outbreaks of rain. In the northeast, the heavy rain will push through over the next few hours, so by 3 p.m. things will have started to settle down. The strong winds are set to be easing too. There'll be something of a north-south split in the weather across Scotland. Wet in the south with some hill snow, drier and sunnier further north, though a few showers. Whilst it won't be as wet or windy as it was this morning in Northern Ireland, there is still going to be some lingering rain around with heavy bursts possible. The unsettled weather will continue to push eastwards through this evening, although drier conditions will follow from the west, and that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 5 to 1, and you're watching Alastair Stewart and Friends on GB News, TV and radio. It looks like the continuing situation in Northern Ireland over the protocol are now going to hit Valentine's Day. The price of roses has more than doubled due to the burdens imposed by that protocol. Our Northern Ireland reporter Dougie Beattie has this report.
Politics, passion, prices and the protocol. And don't forget the pandemic. The EU's influence knows no bounds. The price of flowers has risen, and the paperwork around imports has meant goods now head to the Republic before travelling north. Beth Lunny has ran Saintfield nurseries for years and found with the protocol her former suppliers are now taking a different route.
We would start maybe taking their first load of roses before Christmas. What has happened now is we're not allowed to bring them over. But it turned out I was speaking to one of the lorry drivers who was delivering stuff to me from Holland, and I was asking him how things were going. And he told me that he'd taken a full load of bare root roses down to the Republic of Ireland. He had taken them via one of the Dublin ports from England. So they were able to go in there. We're not allowed to buy them. They were able to go in there. So they went in via from England to the Republic. They went to a nursery in Kildare. They were potted up, and then we had to buy them that way. From there, we weren't able to get roses anywhere else.
Tracy Burrows owns Floral Creations and is facing similar problems and finds it all so very frustrating.
Since even the word Brexit was even mentioned, prices have just increased, like beyond what we could ever have foreseen. You know, like sometime one week you could go in and buy, you know, a bunch of something from the wholesalers and it's one price, and then like 2 days later you could go in and there could be a 60% difference in the prices. Obviously, whenever it comes to peak seasons as well, it's not the florists making all the money. Prices have just jumped so much, and we have no control over that, and it's just soul destroying whenever you're buying your flowers from the suppliers.
In the words of Brian Ferry, what is the price of love, and will we still be expecting roses on Valentine's Day?
He never did, so I'm not expecting them. Okay.
I don't know. I think I might, for I love her so much.
No, I would die of shock. I think he'd been up to something if he came over with roses.
Definitely. I'm worth more than money.
I knew I'd find an advantage to the protocol somewhere. Saving money, plastic flowers. Who ever said romance was dead? Dougie Beattie, GB News, County Down.
The situation there on the eve of Valentine's Day in Northern Ireland. All life is there and all challenges are there. Now, a woman in Northumberland is on a personal mission to remove stigmas around stomas. After a traumatic experience during labour, Jill Castle from Alnwick is now trying to encourage more people to speak openly about their difficulties during pregnancy and indeed during birth. Our North East of England reporter Rachel Sweeney went to Beadnell Beach to meet her.
Jill Castle walks proudly with her stoma, determined to promote body positivity post-pregnancy. Her stoma was fitted after she suffered major complications during a premature birth a decade ago. Her baby was delivered 6 weeks early, weighing just 4.7 pounds. During labour, her son's heart rate dropped and she was seriously injured by the delivery, which needed forceps.
You know, I was in a really, really bad way. I had PTSD, severe anxiety, postnatal depression, you know, had an awful lot of physical and mental problems. But after about 3 years, I decided that I wasn't going to spend the rest of my life like this. And I decided that I was going to embrace living with a stoma and find out all the things that I could do, which essentially is whatever you want.
Jill changed her outlook after receiving support from the Birth Trauma Association, which encourages women to talk about pregnancy and birth openly to end the stigma.
Even with more minor injuries, women quite often either don't seek help for them or they do seek help. And then what happens is they're told that pain is normal, for example, after childbirth, and they shouldn't make a fuss about it and they should just get on with it. Suffering in silence is really, really awful, and women shouldn't be made to just kind of accept pain, whether it's physical, psychological, as a normal part of being a mother, because it's really not, and there is help out there.
Jill says the support she's received has helped her overcome major challenges. She raised £20,000 for charity through skydiving. She's completed a diving course, triathlons, open water swimming, and has even climbed Ben Nevis.
And if that list wasn't impressive enough, Jill is going to attempt to be the first person with a stoma to swim the English Channel.
She says she's doing it to give hope to mothers who are feeling overwhelmed.
What I would like to happen in the future is that people can just be more honest about how difficult it is to have a baby and what it's like once you've had a baby. Let's face it, it's really, really tough. And just because you're finding it tough doesn't mean that you're not a good mum. You can find it tough, but you're still awesome.
Jill says it's time to talk and there are people to listen. Rachel Sweeney, GB News, Northumberland.
Terrific report there from Rachel. You're watching GB News, here with Alastair Stewart. The time is just a few seconds past 1 o'clock. Hello and welcome if you've just joined us at 30 seconds past 1 o'clock. And hello and welcome back if you've been with me since midday. I am Alastair Stewart and we are into the final hour of the programme. I'll be keeping you company on TV and on radio, and we've plenty more still to come, including more on our top discussion today, the continuing crisis in Ukraine. Is this diplomacy or force going to be the resolution? You'll hear my take on it, but I want to hear more of your thoughts as well. So we've all of that to come, but let's bring you right up to date now with all of the news. Here's Ray.
Thanks, Alistair. It's 1 minute past 1. A Russian attack on Ukraine is highly likely, according to Defence Secretary Ben Wallace. He's told the Sunday Times there's a whiff of Munich in the air, referring to diplomatic efforts which failed to prevent the Second World War. Mr. Wallace has now cancelled a planned family trip due to the worsening situation. However, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken says there is still time to prevent a conflict.
A diplomatic path to resolving this crisis, a crisis created by the unprovoked massing of Russian forces all around Ukraine, that diplomatic path remains open. The way for Moscow to show that it wants to pursue that path is simple. It should de-escalate rather than escalate. And it should not only talk about seeking a diplomatic outcome, but actually work toward one.
Antony Blinken. The government must learn lessons from the Afghanistan evacuation if Russia invades Ukraine. That's according to Labour's Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy. He's calling for phone lines to be staffed 24/7 and extra resources put in place to process visas in order to help people leave the country. Meanwhile, he's written to the Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, saying the Labour Party stands united with the government over Russian aggression. Britons have been told by the Foreign Office to leave Ukraine immediately, as Russia could launch an attack in the coming days. The Prime Minister insists he's getting on with the job despite a police investigation into alleged lockdown breaches. Number 10 says he's leaving London and starting the week in Scotland at a manufacturing site before heading to northwest England, where he'll visit an oncology centre. Mr Johnson says the government is focused on working to unite and level up the country. Lord Frost is among a group of senior Tory MPs and peers urging Boris Johnson to reverse the government's ban on fracking as the UK faces an energy crisis. In a joint letter to the Prime Minister, the former Cabinet Minister and around 29 other Conservatives said it's time to reverse this moratorium. The shale gas mining ban came into effect in 2019 after attempts caused 2 minor earthquakes in Lancashire. Lord Frost says ending it would lead to a British energy renaissance. The Mayor of London says he'll oppose the appointment of a new Metropolitan Police Chief unless they have a robust plan to deal with cultural problems in the force. Writing in the Observer newspaper, Sadiq Khan said he was deeply concerned that public trust in the Met had been shattered by a series of scandals. Mr Khan said he would work closely with Priti Patel on the selection of Dame Cressida's successor. 7 people have been rescued after a mezzanine floor collapsed last night at a pub in East London. Ambulance crews declared a major incident at the 2 More Years bar in Hackney Wick. Medics treated 13 people, 3 with potentially serious injuries. A man who was in the venue at the time described hearing a cracking noise before the floor collapsed. The International Atomic Energy Agency is reviewing plans to release 1 million tonnes of water from Japan's Fukushima nuclear power plant. The water had been used to cool the plant's reactors, damaged in the 2011 tsunami. Japan now plans to discharge the treated water into the sea in 2023. Neighbouring China and South Korea have objected to the move. 200 protesters continue to block North America's busiest land border crossing, the Ambassador Bridge in Canada. That's despite police efforts to move them on. Demonstrators opposing vaccine mandates have occupied the bridge for 5 days now, slowing trade and prompting President Biden to call for an end to the siege. So far, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has rejected calls to call in the military. Fully vaccinated British travellers heading to France no longer have to take a coronavirus test before they depart. The travel rules have been eased just in time for the half-term holidays, with many holidaymakers expected to head over there for skiing. The move comes after the UK significantly eased its own rules for arriving travellers. OK, this is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Alastair Stewart and friends.
I'm Alastair Stewart, and until 2 o'clock I'll be keeping you company along with friends and friendly guests. Still to come this afternoon on Alastair Stewart and Friends, we'll continue to look at what the chances are of the tensions between Russia and the West descending into war and the UK's role in that. Armed Forces Minister James Heappey has said that the Royal Air Force would not be in a position to go in to rescue people if a war did break out, and people there should leave now. I want your opinions, and you'll be hearing mine too in just a moment. Plus, we'll have another rising star. After seeing a campaign by Gucci featuring a model with Down syndrome, my next guest was inspired to follow in her footsteps. She's now one to watch in the world of modelling. Beth Matthews will be joining me shortly for our Rising Star segment. And the cost of pasta and tinned tomatoes have increased as shop prices generally rise. Inflation's everywhere, and food is no different. But does it make me wonder? Yes, it does. This help us tackle obesity when healthy food is becoming more expensive than convenience food. GB News is all about you, our viewers. Any burning questions or stories that you think we need to cover, no matter how big or small, we really do want to hear them. Get your voice heard by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk. And do please put Alastair Stewart in the subject line. My big question today has been the continuing situation in Ukraine. The UK Defence Secretary Ben Wallace is talking about the whiff of Munich being in the air, a deal to avoid conflict, but one which caves in to Putin's demands. The key players are still talking, but yesterday's diplomacy ended with a fruitless phone call between Presidents Biden and Putin. I'm delighted to be joined now by an old friend of mine, Liam Byrne, Labour Member of Parliament for Birmingham Hodge Hill. More importantly, he is also a cross-party Foreign Affairs Select Committee member. Great to see you, Liam. Thank you very much indeed.
Good to see you.
We began our conversation today with two people that you know, Mark Liddell-Grant, former UK ambassador to the United Nations, and Michael Graydon, former boss of the Royal Air Force. Mark said that he thought talk could still do it. Graydon feared that Putin would see weakness on our side and make a move. Where do you stand at the moment?
Well, only one person knows, and that's President Putin. And as we know from mistakes that he's made in the past, he does have a nasty habit of miscalculating. Now, I think what we've seen over the last couple of months is Putin really trying to test how united or disunited the Western alliance is. I think actually what he's seen is that it's a pretty united front. And so two things are really important for us now. One, we've got to zero in on Russia's big weakness, which is, of course, its 20,000-kilometre border. 10 of those borders are in Europe, making sure we have harder borders in the Baltic with increased NATO troop presence, potentially accelerating conversations with countries like Finland and Sweden about partnership with NATO, moving forward in Bosnia and potentially moving forward in Georgia. That is a way actually of making sure that any tactical advance by Putin becomes a strategic defeat as NATO actually hardens its border with Russia. And then, of course, the second great weakness that Putin has is that all of his assets are abroad. And so really doubling down on some tough sanctions against the enablers and the people who look after the Putin billions outside Russia, that becomes incredibly important too. So I think maintain the unity, but actually keep up the pressure.
But you know, from having watched these things over the years, I mean, Putin's been around for over 20 years. He is a bully. He has no regard for borders, which you just described there, and he has little regard for international law. Is NATO talking, but saying we will not go into Ukraine to defend those people, really just a sign of weakness?
I don't think so, because I don't think there is a plausible scenario in which you would see NATO defend Ukraine. That would be a massive cost in blood and treasure. It would cost something like $500 billion of the latest US estimates, and it would be a very protracted, brutal and bloody conflict. And so at the moment, we have just got to focus on the deterrents that we can put in place. And that is about creating a much harder border across the whole breadth of Russia's European frontiers. And
that answer, but in that answer, Liam, you encapsulate perfectly my grave concern. It all assumes that Russia is in Ukraine. Oh, we'll defend the rest of the border. We'll have troops and soldiers up in Estonia. We'll have them in Poland. But you know what? I'm sorry, we nod Ukraine through. If Putin wants it, we're not going to fight.
Well, I think the question becomes for Putin, once he has invaded Ukraine, well, then what? I mean, the Ukrainians are not going to roll over. They are now much better geared up, not least because of the arms supplies that both the US and other NATO allies have begun to pour in. And the Ukrainians, have been living with this threat for a long time. This is not going to be some kind of surprise attack. In that sense, Putin has lost the advantage of surprise because of the way NATO has systematically put its intelligence in the public domain. So I think it would be a pretty nasty and brutal conflict for Russia. Many Russian soldiers would die. And you could actually see a situation a little bit akin to Afghanistan, where Russia attempts to become an army of occupation, but over the course of time just finds that impossible to sustain. And at the same time, Russia would just pay this gigantic price in terms of its own security because of the roll forward of NATO that would then follow. No neighbours of Russia are going to kind of stand by and say, OK, we're just going to leave our defence situation as it is. Now we've watched you invade Ukraine. They're going to gear up too. And that's what Putin really fears.
Yeah. Well, I will repeat myself, but all of that assumes that Ukraine's gone by. But let's not take any more time on that, because you've answered twice and very clearly. Let me just bring it home briefly for the last couple of questions, because they do matter. I've had to correct a number of viewers already who suggest that your leader, Keir Starmer, is trying to outshine Johnson on this matter and will stab him in the back on it. And I've said, actually, with due respect, Sir Keir Starmer stood there and said, we stand for square with Boris Johnson's government over the situation of Ukraine. Does it worry you that a lot of folk don't believe that?
No, because I think in politics, action speaks louder than words. And I think people have been impressed with the line that Starmer has taken. It was, of course, a Labour Foreign Secretary who helped found NATO after World War II. It was good to see Keir Starmer at NATO HQ with the Secretary-General this week. If anything, we've been pushing the government to go further when it comes to homeland defence, because, of course, if we're to attack Putin's assets abroad, then we've got to clean up one of the world's great capitals of money laundering, which is, of course, London. And actually, it has been Labour that has been saying, look, let's have better safeguards against money that's been earned in Russia going into political parties. There's about £5 million of donations that have gone into the Conservative Party from Russian-linked donors, for example. You know, there are things like that that we need to just get a hell of a lot tougher on for the future.
Which takes me to my final question, oddly enough. You're, of course, a former Treasury Minister yourself, so you know how these things work. Do you genuinely believe that the oligarchs in Russia are such that they fear the United Kingdom and the global community hitting Russia on the SWIFT international exchange mechanism, hitting their lovely bank accounts in London and New York, more than they worry a NATO tank crossing into their territory?
That's a great question. It's pretty hard to tell how people would compute that equation. But economic sanctions against oligarchs is significant, not least because these oligarchs are stewards of Putin's personal fortune. So Putin has billions of dollars, billions of rubles squirreled away abroad. He has got a strong network of buddies who are looking after that money for him. Beginning to close down that money, beginning to seize those assets or freeze those assets, that really does begin to hit people where it hurts in the pocket.
All right, Liam, great to see you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. And get well soon from COVID. I know that you tested positive. So fingers crossed. Good to see you. Thank you very much indeed. Liam Byrne there, Labour Member of Parliament for Birmingham Hodge Hill and a member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. It's that time of week again, this for our Rising Star segment, where we celebrate the very best that this country has to offer. After seeing a campaign by Gucci featuring a model with Down syndrome, my next guest was inspired to follow in her footsteps, and she's now one to watch in the world of modelling. I'm delighted to be joined by the wonderful Beth Matthews, and on the left of your picture, or perhaps in the middle of your picture, her mum, Fiona. Let me start, Beth. You're in college. What do your college friends think about your ambition to be a model?
Well, in our college, all the teachers and everyone, they are really proud of me, and they keep seeing all the pictures on Instagram.
I'm not surprised. And your mum told us that you've got a particular best friend called Ellie, who is absolutely vital to your happiness and your ambition.
Yeah.
Tell us about Ellie.
It's really cool. Well, Ellie thinks I'm her top model, and also she's proud of me as well.
Ah, well, she's the kind of person we all deserve to have as a good friend. The final thing, and I'll come back to you in a moment, but modelling is all about travelling around the world, and we've watched people go to New York and Florida and wherever. Where would you most like to go, Beth?
Well, I definitely want to go to Hollywood.
Hollywood Drive, all of those palm trees and movie stars, eh?
I think so, yeah.
Absolutely. Beth's mum, I said in the introduction it was about this Gucci advert that Beth saw, and there we're looking at it now if we're watching on TV and on radio if you're just listening. It is a very beautiful and elegant picture of the Gucci advert, and it really is terribly striking. Was it simply that, or was there always a little bit of a hope that maybe this was the way she wanted to go?
Not really. I think until we heard about Zebedee Model Agency, we didn't realise that this was an avenue that we could take with Beth at all. And we also didn't really know how she'd be in front of a camera until we sort of created our own little mini studio in the house with a photographer and gave it a go.
It's interesting, isn't it, that there's tended to be a gradual drift in the modelling industry itself to feature people who are perhaps considerably older than it always used to be a terribly thin teenage girl, including people with disabilities and physical differences. Have you watched that yourself as your daughter has grown up and thought, if that's where she wants to go, actually the door might just be open?
Well, I think it's a fantastic thing. I mean, It's great to see so many different people represented in the industry now, and it has been an awfully long time coming. Again, I sort of mentioned Zebedee again because they started up about 5 years ago, and I think before they were in the market, there wasn't really a huge amount of sort of avenues that you could go down if you had a disability or a difference. I don't think there were that many agencies that would represent you. I could be wrong, but that was certainly the impression that I got. But I think with Beth, I don't know if it's been a dream of hers forever to be a model. I think she's just always loved to have a photograph taken. And if I'm honest, I don't think it's something that we ever considered that she could do. So that's why this has all been such a wonderful experience, really.
I also hear that, if anything, rather than getting demand for her services, which that's good, that's quite nice, you're almost on the point of getting overwhelmed by it because so much has been written and said about her.
We've had a lot of media interest. She had a wonderful piece done about her on BBC Wales. They did a beautiful programme, and since then, I think it went out on the main national website, and it got a huge amount of interest. So much positivity. That's what was so lovely to see. And then we went out onto a couple of other big websites online. We then received a phone call to say that Vogue Italia wanted to do an article on her. She's also had an article in Marie Claire in Brazil. And it's been a whirlwind. I mean, it's been such a busy week, actually.
Beth is just demonstrating part of the trick because apart from being a very beautiful young woman, she has the most compelling smile, and that smile lit up there. There it is. Beth, Mum was just talking about Vogue Italia. You said Hollywood, but do you fancy maybe standing there in Italy, in Rome or somewhere beautiful like that on your next modelling assignment? How does Italy appeal to you?
Yeah. You'd be happy to go to Italy, wouldn't you?
Yeah, Italy, yeah.
Have you been able to do much travelling up to now?
No, we don't. Not really with the modelling. It's all very recent, really.
Yeah.
We only signed up at the end of September, and the new website went live just after Christmas. So Beth has only been on the website for about a month.
Yeah.
We're hopeful that with all the media attention that she's been getting, that we will now get some more exciting opportunities coming our way.
And finally, what do you think they will be? What have you got there on the starting blocks, as it were?
We've got one interesting project coming up, which I can't say too much about, but we don't know. We don't know. We'll just see what comes our way. And I think Beth would love to do fashion shoots, maybe makeup. We're definitely willing to travel, but we'll just wait and see what adventures we have.
Well, when you bank that next project, which is hush, hush, secret now, Fiona, you come back and tell us about it and bring Beth with you as well. You're both very welcome. Beth, lovely talking to you and the very best of luck. And Fiona, thank you so much for setting this all up so we could have that conversation. Really appreciate it very much indeed.
Lovely to talk to you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good to see you. The brilliant Beth Matthews there and her brilliant mum Fiona, our rising stars for today. She's a model with Down syndrome who is one to watch for in the very near future, whether it's Hollywood or Rome. We've plenty more still to come this afternoon on Alastair Stewart and Friends. After the break, the price of tin tomatoes and pasta are on the rise. Is it another obstacle in the way of us living a healthier life? But first, let's have a look at the weather.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking unsettled still as heavy rain and strong winds continue to push eastwards. Let's take a look at the details. After a very wet and windy morning in the southwest, conditions will be starting to quieten down. However, it won't dry up entirely and there will be further rain to come. Meanwhile, in the southeast, the heaviest and most persistent rain of the day will arrive during the middle of the afternoon with strong winds as well. Over in Wales, the most unsettled weather will be clearing away towards the east. That being said, some heavy rain is still likely, particularly over the mountains. It's a similar picture in the northwest of England, where the heaviest and most persistent rain should now be clearing. It'll stay cloudy though, with some outbreaks of rain. In the northeast, the heavy rain will push through over the next few hours, so by 3 p.m. things will have started to settle down. The strong winds are set to be easing too. There'll be something of a north-south split in the weather across Scotland. Wet in the south with some hill snow, drier and sunnier further north though, a few showers. Whilst it won't be as wet or windy as it was this morning in Northern Ireland, there is still going to be some lingering rain around with heavy bursts possible. The unsettled weather will continue to push eastwards through this evening, although drier conditions will follow from the west, and that's how the weather is shaping up for the rest of the day.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. It's 26 minutes past 1 and you're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends here on GB News, TV and radio. Now, a new study has shown that prices for cupboard staples such as tinned tomatoes and pasta have rocketed in recent weeks. Tinned tomatoes alone were up 29%. However, convenience foods have seemed to have stayed either pretty well the same price or even going down a bit, leading to the question, are we being priced out of eating healthily? Joining me now is Olivia Parry, a nutritionist, weight loss coach and good friend of the programme. Great to see you. If good food is costing more and fast food is costing much the same or less, that is a real problem, is it not?
Lovely to meet you, first of all, Alistair. It's really lovely to meet you. I think it's a myth that eating healthily has to be a lot more expensive. So a lot of people find it difficult to be healthy. There's so much contradictory information on the internet. I've actually done a bit of research. I've got, and if you have a ready meal at a fast food restaurant, you know, it might be between £4.50 to £5.50. Whereas if you buy a meal and then you prepare it and you batch cook it and you put it in your freezer, then you're going to save a lot of money. So, you know, there are a lot of ways around, you know, saving money on household bills.
The danger, though, according to this survey, is when you and I and other folk go to the supermarket to do the shopping, then pasta, which we're all agreed is very good and is a wonderful thing for creating all sorts of dishes with, if those prices are beginning to inch up, you might be tempted to buy something cheaper that is not so good for you.
Well, the thing is, I mean, you can buy frozen, I mean, this is not on pasta. And by the way, I don't think pasta is particularly healthy, but that's another story. So, for example, if
No. Hang on a moment. Well, you've got to take me down that road. I thought pasta was one of the absolute best things. That's why Italians live so long, because they eat pasta and lots of olive oil. Am I wrong on pasta?
No, actually, pasta, rice, bread, potatoes, they actually turn to sugar in your blood, which increases your insulin response, which increases your fat storage. So a jacket potato is equivalent to 10 or 11 teaspoons of sugar, you know? Gosh. So, yes, I know that's another whole story though. Let's focus. So, you know, if you buy fresh chicken, for example, I mean, I've just written it down. Fresh chicken, breast fillets, a kilo is £5.35. If you have the thighs, it's half the price. It's £2.20 a kilo. If you switch to the frozen, you know, it's so much cheaper than the fresh. £3 a kilo for frozen chicken thighs. So that's just one example. It's the same with beef. If you buy frozen beef mince instead of fresh beef mince, buy frozen fish instead of fresh mince, you know. It's just being really careful, looking at the prices in the supermarket, looking at the price per kilo so that you know if you're making a saving, and making the choices. So, yes, it's what you buy. But then, you know, I did say before about the meal preparation. So I've actually brought along a few props with me. So what I do is I batch cook, and I put them in these little containers. There we go, chicken korma. Can you see that upside down? And so I'll make enough for 6 or 8 meals. I've got a labelling machine here. So, you know, it's all safely stored in the freezer. So you save time as well as money.
You've mentioned the freezer several times in the conversation, and the thing that strikes me, I'm an old industrial correspondent and did economics at university, but it seems to me that what you're almost saying is treat buying food a little bit like the city treats the futures market. Buy ahead a little more than you perhaps need, use it now, cook it now, freeze it, so when you do need it in a week or a month's time, it'll actually be cheaper because you paid prices that were pertaining a month ago.
Yes, absolutely. And it saves time as well. I mean, the worst question in the world is when your other half says, what's for dinner? You know, it's such a boring question. So what I do is I have a little index card that's stuck on the fridge with a magnet, and it's got the meals for each day of the week. So Friday is usually fish. Tuesday is usually curry. You know, we have sausages one day. We'll have fish, you know, or seafood another day. So you're planning in advance. Yes, that saves money. It saves time. So yes, it's clever kind of domestic science from the olden days. Not that I did that at school, unfortunately. You know, I'm self-taught. My mother was not a good cook, sadly. So yes, and there are ways of, again, further in saving you money. Padding out meat with beans. That's another example. You know, having more vegetables. Again, frozen raspberries compared to fresh raspberries. A kilo of fresh raspberries is £13 a kilo. This is just at my local supermarket, which is one of the cheapest. I'm not going to mention the name. Or if you buy them frozen, it's half the price, £6.60 a kilo. So, you know, you're automatically, and if it's frozen, you know, they keep such a long time.
It is interesting, final point, though, you're talking about not naming names, and I'll mention one, Asda, and they put up the prices.
That's
well, there we go. But they put up the prices of some of their very important staple food stuff. And Jack Munro, the not a bad cook herself and great campaigner on these matters, lent on them, and they've now reduced their prices. I mean, there is a danger that supermarkets could be playing fast and loose with us at what is going to be a really tricky spring and summer on the cost of living.
I realise cost of living, energy prices, another really good tip. Don't use your oven, use your hob. If you're lucky enough to have a gas hob, it's much cheaper using gas than the oven. I'm actually cooking more on my gas hob instead of using the oven. But the article that recently came to light, some of the products in the supermarkets have actually gone down, and supermarkets don't make massive profits. It's a tiny amount of profit on the capital. They're very, very competitive. And again, if you have the time to shop around, if going into work, do you make your own salad or wrap or whatever, or do you buy it when you're out?
Yeah.
What about coffee? Take coffee with you.
Or
don't
shop on the way home from work when those prices have been cut to try and clear the shelves. Olivia, great to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed. Keep in touch. Love to see you again. Olivia Parry, their nutritionist and weight loss coach. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. Plenty more still to come this afternoon. You'll hear my take on our big story shortly. Plus, the shortage of HGV drivers in Britain still causing chaos in the country. Our Yorkshire reporter will be giving us all the details next. But first, let's bring you a roundup with all of the latest news. Here's Ray.
Thanks, Alistair. It's 33 minutes past 1. The Defence Secretary says he fears a Russian attack on Ukraine is highly likely. Speaking to the Sunday Times, Ben Wallace said there's a whiff of Munich in the air, referring to diplomatic efforts which failed to prevent the Second World War. He's now left a family holiday early due to the worsening situation. The Labour Party is urging the government to learn lessons from the Afghanistan evacuation to help people leave Ukraine if Russia invades. Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy is calling for phone lines to be staffed 24/7 and extra resources put in place to process visas. The Prime Minister will leave London this week, insisting he's getting on with the job despite a police investigation into alleged lockdown breaches. Number 10 says he'll start the week in Scotland at a manufacturing site before heading to an oncology centre in northwest England. Lord Frost is among a group of senior Tory MPs and peers urging Boris Johnson to reverse the government's ban on fracking as the UK faces an energy crisis. In a joint letter to the Prime Minister, the former Cabinet Minister and around 29 other Conservatives said it would lead to a British energy renaissance. The shale gas mining ban came into effect in 2019 after attempts caused 2 minor earthquakes in Lancashire. The Mayor of London says he'll oppose the appointment of a new Metropolitan Police Chief unless they have a robust plan to deal with cultural problems in the force. Writing in the Observer newspaper, Sadiq Khan said he was deeply concerned that public trust in the country's biggest police force had been shattered by a series of scandals. On TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Alastair Stewart and Friends will be back in a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Alastair Stewart and Friends. We've plenty more still to come this afternoon. The shortage of HGV drivers in Britain has been causing chaos in the country. Figures from Logistics UK show that the shortage is still at around 85,000, although that is down from 100,000 at its worst in October. New rules implemented in November mean that drivers can take their test in an articulated lorry without having to first pass in a rigid lorry. Our Yorkshire reporter Anna Riley has this report.
Queues at the petrol pumps, food shortages and the rising cost of goods all put the shortage of HGV drivers in the national spotlight last year. The lack of drivers has been blamed on many things, including Brexit, the pandemic and pay and conditions in the industry. But according to the Road Haulage Association, the biggest reason for the shortfall is retirement. In a bid to get new drivers on the road, the government changed the rules last November to allow car drivers to take their test in an articulated lorry without first having to pass in a rigid lorry. This driver in Dewsbury is among the first to have passed his HGV test straight from a car licence at the Fleetmaster Training Centre.
Felt extremely different to driving a car. This vehicle's about 15 metres long, it's 44 tonnes in weight and it's 13'7" high. I had to consider things like lampposts, trees, bridges that we couldn't go under, the length of it, keep my eye in the mirrors to check that I wasn't going to hit anything, pedestrians. It was nothing like driving a car. However, it's automatic, technically it's not difficult to drive, it's just the understanding. And these people were great, they taught me. I listened to what they said and I found I could do it. And after a few hours, it wasn't straight away, after a few hours, it was possible. I've really, really enjoyed it.
Typically, it takes around 12 weeks of theory and practical training to test completion and costs between £2,500 and £3,000 here at Fleetmaster. And the company have seen a real interest in the new scheme.
We are getting numerous more women getting involved. We're getting people from all sorts of different backgrounds, all sorts of different ages, different experiences, whether it be a completely new car driver to somebody in the late 50s, 60s that have always fancied doing it, and now they just thought, now's the time to be getting on with it.
As well as this scheme, the government announced it would train up to 4,000 people as new HGV drivers, increase testing capacity and encourage retired drivers back to the industry. Salaries have also increased to around £30,000 for the job, but there's also been pushback on the industry to improve working conditions.
We do need to attract more women, more younger drivers. The way that we do that is for the industry to promote itself better, to say that, to become an HGV driver, it's not a dirty job, it's a very, very well paid and highly skilled job. And that message needs to come from the industry.
And I even had a go at reversing one of these lorries and just about managed to stay within the cones.
Forwards is a lot easier than backwards. I've got a car licence myself and I can say it's a lot harder than it looks. So credit to anyone that's passed their test straight from a car driving licence to being in this 44-tonne truck Arctic. Anna Riley for GB News in Dewsbury.
That's one way to end a package, it sure is. Now, we've been speaking about the ongoing situation in Ukraine today and the likelihood of Vladimir Putin invading. What is the military role? What is the role of diplomacy? I'm delighted to be joined now by the chair of the Commons Defence Select Committee, Conservative Member of Parliament, Tobias Ellwood. Tobias, good of you to join us once again. Thank you very much indeed. We've already spoken to Mark Liddell-Grant and also Mike Graydon from the Royal Air Force and from the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Liam Byrne. Just 2 quick points from those conversations. Interestingly, Mark Liddell-Grant said diplomacy can still avert war, and in a sense, Putin's already won by becoming the focus of the conversation. Has he got a point there?
Oh, 100%. I mean, we can't avert war through diplomacy because what have we got leverage on the table? We have a thoroughfare of ministers from all right across Europe going to Moscow. But what's our leverage? We have no way of persuading Russia or influencing Russia in any form. And they are enjoying, as you imply, their time in the limelight. They want to be taken seriously. Putin remains angry that the Soviet Union collapsed. And he blames the West for that. His long-term objective, which we're not really waking up to, is to pivot Russia towards China. Any sanctions that we then impose after an invasion will actually help him win his argument with his own people, that's the direction of travel. We're in for a bumpy couple of decades now. International security is on the demise. I've made that very clear. You and I have discussed that, on this program. The world is changing very, very fast indeed. Threats are diversifying. We need to be spending more money on defense. And now we see a European democracy about to be invaded, and the West is, left, wondering what's going on. We really need to do better than this. We've become too risk averse.
Air Marshal Mike Graydon said that he believes, although diplomacy is trying very hard, he thinks it will come to force. Do you actually agree, Tobias? Do you believe that we have to militarily defeat Putin?
Well, it's not defeating Putin, and it's standing up and defending democracy. This is what we're mixing up here. This is a European democracy, Ukraine, putting its hand up and saying, please, the rest of Europe, help me in my hour of need. And we're watching by. We've moved our tanks and our forces all around Ukraine, but not in it. And that's not the language that Putin understands. He takes advantage of weakness. He exploits it. He respects strength. We should have sent a division into Ukraine months ago. We should be putting in a no-fly zone now. There are massive consequences for allowing this to happen. There's talk of Munich. Ben Wallace has been speaking about this. Look what happened there when we hesitated and we ceded control of parts of Europe. Where did that all end? The world is changing fast. The West is looking too risk averse. America is nowhere to be seen. And normally, when America steps back, absents itself from the international stage, that's when Britain steps up to the plate, has that convening power, has that hard power to rally others to stand up against the adversary. That's what I want to see now.
When I read Ben Wallace's comments in the Sunday Times coverage this morning and then read your piece in the Telegraph about all of this, a cold chill went through me, because you say the West lacks leadership, it lacks resolve. The leader in the Telegraph says we're in moral decline almost. And along comes Ben Wallace, Secretary of State for Defence, basically accusing the leaders of the West of just nodding through a deal that is Munich. It was a cave into Hitler. Is it that bad?
It is. And, I feel really sorry for my friend Ben Wallace. They can't say this. The MOD can't say this. But, they're tied by the political direction that's granted by Number 10. But, boy, I know that they would like to do a lot more privately. They would absolutely. There's a gap in the market for international leadership that Britain could step into. But all the leading nations in Europe are looking in different ways. And Putin is taking full advantage of that. We can do much better than this. We really can. But it requires better situational awareness. It requires better statecraft to muster the forces that are actually required to stand up to Putin. And then he will blink. There's no doubt about it. This is our Cuban Missile Crisis. And, we are blinking ourselves.
Sir Nick Soames' birthday boy yesterday was on the programme. We chatted about all sorts of things, but one of the things that, again, you and I have talked about this before, is how important it is to have men and women who've served in uniform in the House of Commons. And he said it was good that Ben was an ex-Hussar, that you and Tom Tugendhat also are men who wore uniform. Let me put this to you, though, and it's completely the opposite side of that coin. Are you guys actually collectively sabre-rattling a little bit? You quite fancy this?
That's, completely wrong. To suggest that, is it almost an insult, actually. The purpose of what you learn at Sandhurst is not only to understand our own strengths, but also to understand the direction of travel of your adversary. And it is very, very clear. I can't spell it out any clearer than this. Russia and China are forming a very dangerous alliance. And the reason why Russia is on the advance right now is because Russia knows they've got China to support them. And the West has never been more risk-averse since 1991. And Russia and both China are taking advantage of that. This isn't saber-rattling. This is a European country, Ukraine, calling for help. And where is the West? Nowhere to be seen.
Tobias Ellwood, I didn't mean to insult you. I just meant to report what was there in the open conversation. And as ever, straight question, straight answer. Great to see you. You're welcome anytime. Thank you very much indeed for finding time for us here on GB News.
Thank you very much.
Tobias Ellwood there, the Conservative Member of Parliament, but also, more importantly, Chairman of the Commons Defence Select Committee. I've always said that this is all about a post-Cold War reset. Tobias Ellwood there saying that it's this generation's Cuban Missile Crisis. For those who don't remember or don't know, it's when United States President Kennedy faced down the then leader of the Soviet Union, Khrushchev, over Russian nuclear weapons in Cuba. Khrushchev blinked and the ships turned back. Putin shows no sign of blinking as he sits in the Kremlin with his generals, his armies littered along the border with Ukraine and on Belarusian territory. The West's diplomacy has so far come to naught. Sir Mark Lyle-Grant said it still has a way to go, but the US says Russia may well make a move within days. It does seem to me that Putin sees a weakness in the current leadership of the West, a weakness in its resolve. The Daily Telegraph, well worth reading today, goes so far as to say our complacent decadence has left us vulnerable. As Tobias and I were just saying, Ben Wallace's talk of Munich is frightening. Chamberlain got a piece of paper from Hitler saying he'd behave. We all know how that ended in the Second World War. I am no warmonger, but I'm fearful that we are drifting toward a situation where Putin does make a move, minor or major, and as Tobias also said, we perhaps won't know what to do next. It really is a frightening situation. It would empower Vladimir Putin, it would humiliate the West, and it would leave China's President Xi ready to get down to the real reset talks, global reset talks with Putin that both men cherish. Xi may want to wait until his cherished Winter Olympics are over, but as things stand, all of the medals look to be headed for our foes, with none, if any, headed our way. I really do pray that I'm wrong about that. So I asked at the very beginning of this programme to get your thoughts on this matter, and you have been lively and busy from start to finish. Let's begin with Sadie, who says Belarus has a say in all of this too. Lukashenko's been in power longer, so who's now holding the reins here? Well, he's certainly a very close ally of Mr. Putin, and there are a lot of Russian troops, as well as Belarusian troops, clearly on the soil there. Paul joins the conversation by saying, I think we're all hoping for diplomacy to succeed because the alternative is too unimaginable to comprehend. I couldn't agree with you more on that, Paul, and I hope I made it clear in my thoughts just a moment ago. Fiona says we should be firm in our stance against Russian aggression and stand resolute in our support and defence of Ukraine. The principles of the free world and self-determination are at stake here. Very profound stuff there from Fiona. Sandy comes on board. British troops must not be committed. Our army and air force have been cut beyond the bone. The politicians who cut them must now sort this out without having a big stick to wave. Not one British soldier must die for their neglect and incompetence. Wayne says it's only a matter of time. There is no way that Putin will back down now, and if the Ukraine does join NATO, then it becomes a worldwide issue. Wayne there reminding us that it actually goes back to Ukraine's desire to be a part of NATO and Vladimir Putin saying no way. Peter joins in the conversation. Russia's economy is a mess and desperately needs higher prices for its main export of crude oil and natural gas. Most likely, he is going to use Ukraine's crisis to achieve this. If this is correct, then Putin has succeeded in his goals and absolutely zero cost to Russia. Peter, I think that's one of the most intriguing contributions, and it reminds me of what Mark Liddell-Grant said about the programme. There are very straightforward black and white arguments. Either we let diplomacy run and maybe they can talk us to peace, hopefully, God willing, or it is a more militarist solution. But I think that subtle soft power, the idea of sanctions, taking into account the need for Russia to be able to deliver gas, liquid petroleum gas to Europe for lots of money is important. So the new pipeline comes into play. But also don't forget what Liam Byrne said, that there are people, men and women in Russia, the oligarchs, the multi-billionaires, to whom sanctions that impact upon their style of living and their investments really do matter. So I think you hold in that comment a real glimmer of hope that it maybe doesn't have to be just talk, and it doesn't have to be the clash of sabres. We've now got a comment from, I think, David, is that right? Yeah, sorry, I beg your pardon, Douglas. Putin's won merely by making himself... No, we've got David first. Putin has won merely by making himself centre of attention. Now everyone is alert to his presence. Even if his approach seems very childish, he has the weapons at his disposal to do as he pleases. And finally, it is Douglas. Here comes Douglas. Strong US leadership, evidently lacking from the Biden administration, is needed to propel this strategy, but none of NATO's membership appears willing at all to bring pressure to bear on their allies to adopt this strategy. So thank you all very much indeed for those comments. I guess we will watch and wait. As I've said before, it's always a question of you raising issues that we want to cover as well. And our rural spotlight surprised many of us with just how interested you were in that, whether you were from the countryside defending what's yours, or whether you were from the towns and the cities who said we're happy to go there and we are happy to behave when we're there. So that was great stuff on that. Thank you very much indeed. That, alas, is all that we have time for today, but I will be back next week on Friday from 8 o'clock and then, of course, on Saturday and Sunday at midday. Do enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Looking ahead to this afternoon, and the UK is looking unsettled still as heavy rain and strong winds continue to push eastwards. Let's take a look at the details. After a very wet and windy morning in the southwest, conditions will be starting to quieten down. However, it won't dry up entirely and there will be further rain to come. Meanwhile, in the southeast, the heaviest and most persistent rain of the day will arrive during the middle of the afternoon with strong winds as well. Over in Wales, the most unsettled weather will be clearing away towards the east. That being said, some heavy rain is still likely, particularly over the mountains. It's a similar picture in the northwest of England, where the heaviest and most persistent rain should now be clearing. It'll stay cloudy, though, with some outbreaks of rain. In the northeast, the heavy rain will push through over the next few hours, so by 3 p.m. things will have started to settle down. The strong winds are set to be easing too. There'll be something of a north-south split in the weather across